I went to a meeting this morning, driven a long way to get there, so I was tanked up on caffeine by the time I arrived. And I was convinced you were sitting in a control van with some sort of remote control thing. Because I went up to the door, and it's one of these great receptions that's double height atrium.
Yeah.
Okay, so pretty grand. Plants and everything.
Kind of place I'd be hanging out.
Place,
Sort of place
and it had a revolving door. Okay, the revolving door was stationary so that the draft didn't go out. And there was a button you push to wake it up. So I pushed the button, nothing happened. So I'm sat there thinking, pushed again, nothing happened. You know, Einstein, keep pressing, expecting a different outcome. Rung the person I was going to meet, no answer. Anyway, just out of the blue, without me doing anything, the door started rotating. So I thought, oh, here we go, I'm in. So I stepped into the rotating door. It went around a quarter of a turn and stopped. I was stuck in it. So I couldn't get in or out. So then it reversed. It went back the other way again.
Okay.
And it must detect that someone trapped. So it went backwards a quarter turn, so I stepped out. So I thought that was a path. Looked around to see where you were with the remote control of the doors. Anyway, it started rotating again. So I thought, well, maybe that was just a glitch. Maybe overload sensor or something. So anyway, I stepped back in again. Guess what?
Got
again. Stuck again. Reversed, let me out again. Someone else came along. Door started rotating. Went straight through. I thought someone is wandering up here.
Some beetles about or something.
It was one of those, you've been framed. Gosh. So then someone actually came in with one of these card things and wafted it in front of the sensor.
So you can only get so far through the doors.
Yeah. I thought someone was having a practical joke thing. So we could do a whole new podcast series on what receptions are like. Because I'm sure a lot of us visit different companies. See a variety of different styles of reception.
Well, my morning, I was asked, Ethan was saying about he's got some money saved up. And his mum was asking him what he wanted to do with it. Right. And he said, he's like, Dad, can I stick it in an index fund?
An index tracker?
I was like, you what? He's like, yeah, I've been learning all about it on YouTube, index funds. I was like, well, go on then, what's an index fund? He said, well, you can invest in one share or another share, but they can go up and down, but an index fund is like a big group of them, so it's kind of more the market than the... I was like,
perceptive,
fair play. So, so there we are. It's like...
So he's going to put his pocket money into
his pocket money. So then he wanted me to work out, like, how much if he put his pocket money away every month, what would that would be worth by the time he's like 60 or something. I thought, well, yeah, it's probably better than spending it on Robux. They've had enough of my money.
Well, I'm sure there was something on Instagram the other day, a lesson for young people considering pensions. If you put, I think the example they used was $1,000, $1,000 a month away between the ages of 21 and 30, and then stopped contributing, you'll have more money when you retire than if you start contributing at 30 and put $1,000 a month away until you retire.
Right. Depressing.
So that 10 years of commitment up to 30 will get you more than 35, 40 years starting later. So start early, kids.
Compound interest.
Which is all about risk taking, isn't it?
Which is all about risk, which leads
we should do a podcast about that. Should we do a podcast then?
Yeah.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the SME Growth Podcast. And my notes reliably tell me we're on episode 86. But I got that wrong last week, so I'm going to look to Rich to confirm 86 is the number.
Yeah, could be. Could be, yeah.
So thanks again. It's produced for you by Wellmeadow. And here we are, Rich and I, from Wellmeadow to present the podcast for you. And
greetings.
Come up with some useful and interesting and every now and again amusing content for you to help you or prompt your thoughts perhaps a little bit in your efforts to run your own companies on their growth journeys. So, in time-honoured fashion, what have we been talking about recently? What was the last episode? 85.
85. You got the list.
You've forgotten. It was 8 last week. Already. Labour reforms.
Labour reforms.
So there's a lot of chat, wasn't there, about what could be coming. No one knows yet, for sure. Lots of stuff coming out in the press, speculation. Yep. And I have noticed an increasing frequency of emails coming in saying SMEs aren't prepared for this, you've got it prepared or you're going to suffer and all that sort of thing. But our tone last week was very much more calm, stay calm, it's just good practice and maybe the devil will be in the detail, but let's just wait and see what it is and it'll probably be not too bad.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. Who knows? Who knows? Exactly, that's the point. You need to give business some certainty here.
But as you said, giving extra rights to mothers with babies or
Yeah.
day one sickness rights. These aren't going to change our world. Even the day one rights to employment law, well, day one after a probation period, let's just get better at probation periods then.
Yeah.
You know. So anyway, we covered that off. 84 was the episode before that, RevOps, which I think has just become one of our
it's our biggest, most watched episode on YouTube, I think.
On YouTube, yeah, it's our YouTube star one. So if you haven't seen RevOps yet and you're interested in revenue operations from the point of view of growing your business from quote to cash, that's what that was all about.
Yep.
And then the one before that was episode 83, Is Inbound Dead? And we were talking there about don't forget all the old-fashioned ways of prospecting and getting sales. Don't rely on inbound only, passive stuff, because it's quite a slow burner.
Got to get on the hustle.
Yeah, so there were our previous three. So today I was in the car and I was listening to a couple of podcasts and the name Nate Silver came up, which may or may not mean anything to anybody. But he was being interviewed by Robert Peston and Steph McGovern on the Rest Is Money podcast, one of Gary Lineker's stable. Anyway, he got famous for setting up a polling. He's a statistician type bloke, but he got famous for setting up a polling company that correctly guessed the outcome of the 2008 US election in 49 states out of 50. And he's since gone on and generated a whole thing. I think his website's called 538, written out as words. But his background, interestingly, was in being a professional poker player.
Oh, yeah.
So we were just having a chat about making it mandatory that all board of directors should play poker.
I think it would be a very interesting thing to observe. I think you'd learn a lot. I think you'd learn a lot about each other by having a poker game.
And see their traits, who's more risk averse, who's gung ho,
I'll add it to my cook a roast dinner recruitment process test,
which
I've always thought would be an interesting.
Do you ask, have you ever cooked a roast dinner, or how do you cook a roast dinner?
I'm not sure. I was thinking about giving them a budget as well. So here's a budget, and you get to keep what's left over, maybe. Right. So you could go. You
get to eat the roast dinner. They're actually going to do it.
Well, no, but I mean, you could go and buy like a rotisserie chicken and some frozen potatoes and whatever, and do it that way. Couldn't you? Keep 90 quid or whatever. Or you could think, you know what? I'm going all out on this. I'm doing it really well.
And you use that in interviews to more probe whether someone can multitask and plan ahead. And
well, I don't know if I've ever actually used it. I've always wanted to, because I don't know how you'd have to watch them do it. But I'd just be interested to see, could you? I've got a roast dinner on the table by 5 o'clock. Yeah. What are you going for? You're going for chicken? You're going for lamb, beef, whatever? What's the sides? How special is it?
So if while you were doing your roast dinner, you were playing poker, we would be able to combine
be good. That would be
project management with appetite for risk.
I think you'd have had to have cooked quite a few roast dinners to be able to play. Although if you've got your roast dinner game down, there's a long period of lag once you've done the prep before you really got to get crazy.
You could fit
with
a couple of rounds in.
You could definitely fit a few.
So poker might well be an interesting exercise to get a board of directors through, or maybe interviews for directors. How we get in poker. So the point of all of this was that risk taking cannot be ignored in a business sense. If you were to take no risks at all, then you're probably going to be welcome in maybe the airline industry or a utilities company. Although having said that, utilities are in the news, certainly water companies, aren't they?
They've taken a few risks.
Risks with
our health.
Our water quality. So unless you're in one of those sort of businesses, then we all as managers have to take risks of some magnitude every day. Well, that's part of our management job anyway. Yep. So the point was really to have a little bit of a discussion about that and work out what advice can we give, what experiences have we had in the past where risks have gone either well or badly. So that's what I thought we'd start
with. And this could be a little bit political. I don't want to get political, but...
Well, we were very quiet about the politics through the election, so now we can
let loose.
Let rip.
But the whole risk versus the old Jonathan Ross voice going on there. Risk versus a reward is going to play into the whole capital gains tax type of thing. You know, should you be paying more capital gains tax for on a business, for example, if you've taken all the risk and done everything, and then where's the reward? Where's that kind of balancing out of starting a business, taking all the risks in the early years, doing or at any time really, and then the idea of that is that from an entrepreneurial kind of viewpoint is that the rewards come after. Yeah. And actually there's quite a lot in the press at the moment about, are we killing that kind of, is the balance of the risk reward tipping in the favour of kind of well, not in the favour of anything really, but is that whole idea being not destroyed, but eroded
but not
by
encouraging
taxation?
it, yeah. So your point is that there should be some mechanism somehow through a government, whether it be a tax or a break or something like that, which rewards risk taking by entrepreneurs. And I think it's broader than that, in that there's a societal impact to that too. And we've talked before, haven't we, that if we were setting up some of our business ideas we've tried in the past in Silicon Valley, you would have had a very different attitude when you told people about it, maybe more people prepared to invest in it because there was just that bit more of a risk-taking sort of atmosphere. I think Brits are reasonably cautious, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I think it's probably it's not so much the reward, it's the risk failure, isn't it, that we have a problem with. We really, as culturally, I don't think we really embrace failure in the way that maybe
failure is seen almost in isolation, to say, oh, well, they tried something, failed, they can't have been very good then.
Yeah.
Ignoring the fact, really, that a lot of successful companies had a string of failures behind them first, because that's how you learn.
That's how you learn, yeah.
So really, as we've often said, failing our way to success, everything that doesn't go badly, if you can't learn from it, learn from it, and Hackney's old phrases like that.
Exactly.
So yeah, you're right. There's a whole risk of being political about it, but certainly a business environment angle to this. How do we make sure that risk-taking at that bigger level, starting up a business or doing something that takes a lot of investment, how is that got in balance? But I'm also thinking even at the manager in a business that doesn't own the business, they still have to take risks which might impact their results, their KPIs, their team, their success as a department, their year-end figures. And I do worry sometimes that businesses, certainly smaller businesses, tend to be quite risk-averse generally. And I'm giving a very UK perspective on this, maybe UK mature industries perspective, as opposed to startups, which I think are by their very nature a lot more risk takers.
Yeah.
But I think if you're starting up, you're kind of going to be, aren't you, really? Because it's all or nothing.
And I suppose it depends on the size of the reward, doesn't it? So if you were starting up a software company, you think, well, actually, there's a lot of inherent risk in starting a software company. We've been there, done that. But the size of the reward could be massive. Because
and I'd like to think that was our logic, right?
The market
we said that
is there.
Could be something that earns money while you sleep, as long as people keep signing up for your subscription-based product.
So that kind of, you think, well, there's a big enough reward. So you've got to, I think the size of the risk has got to be commensurate with the size of the reward. And often, would you see that in a smaller business? What's the upside of taking a risk kind of thing? You're not going to. Maybe harder to quantify, established business. I
think the problem, taking that as a good example, is how much of a stake can you afford to bet on each of the risks that you come across? So if you were Amazon at the moment, or Google or Microsoft, whatever, trying to come up with the equivalent of our software product, which is a minute-taking software, Magic Minutes, you would sniff at the piddling little amount, a few $100,000 that we had to pile into that to get it to work, on the grounds that you've got quite a good reach anyway to spread the word out. But even if you didn't, it's a reasonably small amount considering the chances of it succeeding. The return would be definitely on your side. The challenge that we were facing is that whilst that maths is the same, we might have said there's 20 to 1 chance of it doing well, or 100 to 1 chance or whatever. But for the sake of a couple $100,000 of investment, it could have been worth an awful lot more. Our problem wasn't that. Our problem was that a couple $100,000 is a lot of money for a small business. Yeah. And it's the opportunity cost. What else could we have done with that money? Yeah. And indeed our time.
Well, and then the risk is, well, you want to borrow more money. So then you've got to, if you've got to borrow more money to get the money, you're into personal guarantees, you're into all sorts of other things that potentially that you could be thinking about that a larger company wouldn't have to think about so much potentially. So you've got the risk starts to migrate into your personal life, and I suppose you could argue that about Jeff Bezos or whatever. There's always going to be an element of that. And at the start,
but now when Musk bought Twitter, it was it seems like a lot of money to us, doesn't it? $44 billion, whatever it is, but it's a proportion, a smallish proportion of his total wealth. Whereas not many people can think that way, can they?
Well, and I think as well, you're looking at the same, take just as an example, Magic Minutes, our software, which I've actually got a pen, Magic Minutes pen.
Anybody watching on YouTube can see the Magic Minutes branded pen. Yeah.
So that came through yesterday. Whoever sent that, thank you very much. Free pen. Probably never buy another one because I've got one now.
We could talk about that as a marketing strategy as well.
It hasn't worked because I've just used the pen and I rubbed the logo off the other one. So there we go. Shocking.
I hope they're not watching.
But it's what was I going to say? Yeah, the size of the market for that product is theoretically the same for us as it would be if Amazon did it.
Yeah, anyone who has meetings.
So that
Yeah.
That is the same, but the reach that someone like Amazon would have compared to us is massive because they could advertise it. It doesn't cost them to stick it on Amazon and get a gazillion people every day.
Or if it was Microsoft, they just bundle it in their software.
Yeah.
And in fact, they could have done that. If we'd have got even moderately successful, we could have had the rug pulled out from underneath us by someone who just gave it away for free.
So Bill, Jeff, if you're listening,
go and look it up.
The email address is richard.
So we talked there, though, about founder risk, where it's your own money, it's your own stake, isn't it? So I'm particularly interested in managers in businesses who tend to apply the same type of thinking month in, month out when their results come in, whether it's good or bad. They don't tend to, well, I worry that in some cases they don't respond to what they're seeing happening and choose a different course of action. They instead come up with a narrative which explains why what's just happened, rather than necessarily learning from that. And even sometimes this extends quite long-run trends. You know, we could have 6 months or 12 months of a market declining, and you'll say, oh, the market's declining, rather than suggesting, okay, we need to now take a risk. We're either going to get out of that market, or we're going to double down and really try a different approach, maybe change the pricing strategy on that market, or try and approach a different route to market, or we're going to go through different channels. And I don't see managers coming up with that sort of degree of risk-taking ideas even if they don't make it into implementation. You don't see them being discussed quite as freely as I think an owner might want them to. And I worry if this is an imbalance of risk and reward. So what do you think would happen in a normal SME? Someone does something a bit crazy and they succeed and it pays off versus it fails and they're made to look a bit of a numpty. How do you think people weigh that up?
I think depending on how explicit the risk was, I think because probably culturally we would tend to hide the risk anyway. If we were doing something risky, you'd probably try and not cover it up, but you probably wouldn't shout from the rooftops that, hey, I'm trying this really out there left field strategy. You might try and...
Well, you could argue, though, that's a great defence for it. If you've socialised the risk, you've sort of collectively made the decision. Right, I'm going to do this. No one's telling me not to. No, right, great. Well, we're going to try this new exhibition in Moscow because that's really good to do business in at the moment. Going to set up a new office in Kyiv. You know, that if you've got everybody around you agreeing to it, it's sort of spreading the risk, the decision making. I don't know.
Well, yes, I suppose the committee kind of you can spread the blame, but then no one gets that. It almost becomes we just did. The reward side of that is not any one person, then, is it? So you kind of you dilute the. So
you think the temptation is then to not be too open about some of the riskier decisions that you might take?
I think culturally, I just think it comes back to that point that culturally, we don't favour risk takers. We don't. You know, we will back someone until
we do when they win,
to a point.
We laud someone like Dyson, for example, or Richard Branson, to pick British examples. When they do well, we say, didn't they do well? That's great, isn't it?
Yeah, but hasn't Dyson moved to Singapore now? So I heard everyone was slagging him off the other day. Oh, look, he's moved money, he's gone to Singapore. Well, he can do what he wants. He's a billionaire, isn't he? So
it's his money.
Do what you want.
Branson lives on
but at the same time, he's created loads of jobs and innovation and all that kind of stuff.
But I think on the whole, you're right, people slag him off for his political opinions, but on the whole, people say he's a boy done good. He's an engineer. He's made a lot of money out of innovative engineering designs, and he's ploughed an awful lot of that money back into universities. Lots of Dyson Institutes all over the place. So on the whole, we praise him for the success, but we almost ridicule the sort of the equivalent of the Eddie the Eagle type business types who try something and it just looks completely daft. That was never going to work, and when it doesn't work, you feel as if you would have known it anyway.
I mean, I suppose like the Dyson and the Branson example, they're so far down the massive brand success. That's uncommon to the SME world, I would say. You haven't got that kind of brand amplification that you're talking about. So then I think unless as well you got what's in it for me. That's a big component, I think, of the risk reward. So I'm going to take a risk in a business somewhere that, okay, so what, I might get a bonus or I might not, or I might, where's the other side of that equation coming for me to risk my career potentially, to risk my reputation, to risk all these things.
Although I'd use an example, Keith, a client of ours before, who, I wouldn't say he stuck his neck on the line, but certainly put his weight behind the idea of investing, a sizable sum in some 3D printing kit, and we're not talking about plastic gizmos here, we're talking about pretty large industrial 7-figure sum type things, without there being a solid market demand evidence for it. It was more of a build it and they will come business strategy, and it worked. Now, I don't think, I'm pretty safe in saying he hasn't gained personally from that success in financial terms. Probably has in kudos and general satisfaction, professional pride and that sort of thing. But he didn't need there to be some sort of kicker into his bank account to make that call. It would have been easier for him to say, there isn't any solid market evidence yet. Customers aren't knocking our door down saying, I'll do this or not. So let's not bother until we know a bit more. And I've seen a lot more of that decision being taken over the years in other, maybe slightly more trivial examples. But until we know for sure, let's not do it.
I suppose as well, you could add to that it's not his money being invested, is it? So there's that, okay, I'm not getting the money, but if you take it purely financially, it's not my money. Even if I'm at the managerial level, it's not the owner level, it's not my money being invested, but I'm not quite sure whether I'm going to get rewarded for taking this risk.
Sure.
So there's maybe that neutralizes itself, or there's some kind of trade-off between the two. But I think it's almost about, you've got to have that, and I'm sure we've spoken about this on the podcast before, you've got to create that culture where risk-taking is seen as something that is valuable to the business, and that's not to be reckless. It's about having that psychological safety from within the board, from the ownership, from within the board, cascading down the organisation to say, it's okay to take risks here, but I think you almost want to make that a culture where it's very open, because you don't want people going off taking risks on their own. I think that's probably where it gets dangerous.
Yeah, well, that's the point I was railing against earlier when you said if you were to take a risk like that in the wrong type of organisation, you might be encouraged or encourage yourself to keep it quiet. And I think it's better to socialise it. And I think the example there that Keith came up with, what I quite liked about that organisation, is that if there is a culture of being prepared to consider lots of things, then you might well have several bets on the table that you're prepared to consider. Doesn't mean you have to take any of them, and you certainly wouldn't take all of them. Yeah. But if you had 10 bets on the table, and between you all you discussed, what's the potential return on that? Yeah. And what's the risk of getting, what's the chance of getting it? And a bit like when Nat Silver was talking on this other podcast, he said, poker's just a game of trying to balance up the difference between the reward you're going to get for something, the stakes and the how much cash is on the table, and what your perception of your chance of winning it is. So he said, if there's a 6-to-1 priced bet at the betting shop, but you think the odds are actually 3-to-1, then it's in your interest to bet on it, because 1 time in 4 you'll win 6 times your money, so you'll end up better off. Now imagine in the business environment, if every board meeting had, it doesn't have to be half a dozen every board meeting, but if there were a plurality of options, and we could say, well, hang on a minute, if that one came off, like we said with Magic Minutes, that could be 100-to-1 payback, easily. What's the chance of it coming off? Is it more likely than 100-to-1? Yeah, probably. Maybe it's 50-to-1, 30-to-1. Right, okay, well, we'll put that in the maybe pile then. What else have you got? Well, this one here, maybe that's only a 10-to-1 return, but it's an evens chance of winning, and the stake is only 100 quid. Right, well, let's go for that one then. That's easy. So it's a combination of the expected return, your chance you think of being able to get that return, and the size of the stake. And if as a management team you had a series of those around, you could say, well, hang on, let's not go and open up the Kiev office just yet. I think the return there is probably quite low. The chance of winning, that's not going to work. However, going to this new exhibition that we've never been to before, or launching a new postal mail-based marketing campaign that is probably quite expensive per user, but give it a go, you might get some of those to go through and try it out a little bit.
Or getting Gen Zers to do your marketing campaigns. That is
all
cringe.
over the Instagram.
It is the most cringe thing to use.
They all find it very funny because they can laugh at us.
It's just horrendous. Please don't do it. Please don't do it.
Well, I think it's been done. I think if you were first to do that, hats off.
The first one that I saw was hilarious. The guy who seemed to kick it off was that realtor chap in America who
in Florida
who videoed himself and just did the breathy kind of
all the bits before we spoke.
All the bits before we spoke. The millennial pause, they call it. Yeah. So that was funny. Now everyone's jumped on it, and it's just unbelievable. That's a risk. That's on the do not even go close to risk pile.
That's been done. Yeah.
But so back to before I got my soapbox about that.
You definitely got your soapbox
strongly about it. Yeah, so I suppose we've done things like this in the past where we looked at like strategic option ranking comparison. So where you've got a lot of options or maybe
a few criteria,
options,
score them out of 10.
Score them out of 10.
Give them a weighting.
So you could think about doing something like that.
I think that was good for working out if you had to do one of 5 things, which one would you choose?
Yeah.
That was good for that. But I think the scenario I've just painted there might be where you choose either all 5 or none of them or anything in between. But it's down to being reasonably data-driven about it as best you can, but exercising your judgment. You know, if we were to suddenly do an exhibition in Sydney, Australia, because we've never done it before, what's the possible return from that? You know, if that's going to cost us $100,000 by the time we've all got there and set up the stand and all that, what might we get out of it? Okay, that's the return. What's the chance of that coming off? Well, that's this. How much are you going to get? Right, should we do that? Put that alongside all the other things. Maybe yes, maybe no. But my lament, if you like, is that we're maybe not even getting those things put on the table to start with, and it can't all come from the business owner. Everybody's got a very different perspective. They've got access to different information. We need people to be thinking of new things to bring to the table to say, but what about if we did this? Why don't we take on one more salesperson than we need? Don't give them a territory. Just let them roam. You know, let's accost that. What might that give us? Or sometimes you hear people in a board discussing, should we take on a purchasing director? What might that save? Well, we spend $3 million a year on purchased goods. Okay, well, what's the percentage potential that might be to save? What does one cost? What's the chance of getting it? You know, you do hear that sort of thing because it's reasonably conventional thinking, but it's still a risk. But it's a bit more of the slightly out there stuff. I don't see as much of that as maybe you might want to get, or certainly you would get if you had a fairly risk-friendly CEO or founder. So that was kind of and we talked about data-driven there. We could do that sort of thing. Scenario planning is an interesting one as well to try and work these things through. And this is I was listening to another podcast about how you train yourself using generative AI. And a good example I found, not relating to this, but I'll come on to it, is that if you're a salesperson going into a pitch, then get the ChatGPT or whatever your flavor is to assume the personality of the buyer. Okay. And ask it to play the role of them while you're in a conversation with them, and almost train yourself to cope with all the potential objections you might get back and different reactions. And I thought that was quite good.
I'll probably work on the domestic front as well.
Well, now there's a product. Right, what's the return on that one? I'm going to go home and say I've got a golf weekend lined up with the lads and see what the reaction might be. Yeah, depends on lots of things. So scenario planning in terms of a risky type business opportunity. You could use AI. It's almost like a brainstorming thing. Yeah. You know, what might go wrong? What's the chance of that? What do you think? And just use it almost as a sounding board to start to build a bit of a picture. Say, here's a proposal. Would we go for it or not? Do I back this or not?
Yeah, I think it's part of the risk mix, isn't it? As you've talked about, you know, the data-driven decision making, which is almost a kind of a phrase that's probably overly used.
It's too easy to say because the data's not normally there, is it? You haven't got any data.
But it's about trying to build that. And I think culturally as well, so the example you're giving before of the stamp printing, you know, there was a culture in that business of, like I say, bringing ideas and people inputting and getting that type of thing that was fairly innovative in terms of what was being done, R&D and things like that. And it's about having, I think once you start down that path, then probably, and maybe this is where you see a difference between the companies that take risks and the companies don't in terms of rewards. But I think the more you go down that path, the more you think, right, okay, we're going to take some decisions that are going to be a bit risky or potentially risky. Right, so what do we need? We need to minimize that risk as much as possible through the information that we've got, through the systems that we've got, through the intelligence that we're gathering from the market, from the people that are actually making the decisions. Because I do think the more you put yourself in that zone of making decisions, the faster you can make them.
Yeah, I think that's true. Yeah,
I think if
you could train yourself,
you can train yourself in decision making processes, even if it's not. You know, there's. I remember seeing somebody talk who was ex-RAF, and they have some kind of framework that they use for decision making when they're, you know, if you're in a fighter jet, and you know, you can have a dogfight or something. There's sort of 5 steps they went through in terms of whatever they were. I can't remember off the top of my head.
Training.
But having that framework to work from, I think you could build quite an interesting competitive advantage around that. if you built that into your
The more
culture
you
and your
did it,
systems,
you
and
get
the more you
muscle
do
memory. Yeah. I was reminded the other day, I was talking to an old friend who'd been to an angel investor meeting, probably a lunch or something. And it struck me that that is the classic example where you've got a lot of wannabe business idea representatives turning up to do their pitch. And it's a classic distillation of exactly what we've just talked about. You know, here's how much money I'm asking for you for in return for shares of whatever. This is what I think the potential return might be. And then those listening are forming their own judgment of, well, what's the chance of that one paying off? You know, does the person presenting sound credible? Does their plan sound credible? And so on. And they're just doing a calculation. And if they get to see, you know, 3 or 4 each lunchtime and they meet once a month, then over a period of time, they'll pick the best ones. And that's where they put their investment. My suggestion is that we have that sort of culture somehow within a business. But as you said earlier, it's harder to do in a small business. The best you get is a capital application, you know, a CapEx proposal. I want to put a new machine in and what's the payback and all that. But it's all pretty straight line, really. It's not quite the same as, you know, let's develop a new product to do this, or, you know, can I go and open a market in Singapore or something a bit different? Or even just, as I say, low level, come and choose a different exhibition to go and present at this year, or can I try a different pricing strategy for our product just as a test? You know, it's that sort of innovative risk taking that I think we're missing a lot of. And my worry is that we punish the failure way more out of proportion than we reward the success.
Yeah, I think so. That would be my...
Especially if after the event everyone says, oh, it was obvious that was going to work, wasn't it? That wasn't a great idea.
Yeah,
like the guy who said about the Vesta matchboxes, you know, let's take the sandpaper off one of the sides and I'll save a load of costs. And it was supposedly some suggestion scheme where they were paying a percentage of savings and they didn't want to pay it out. So they said, well, it's obvious, that is.
Yeah.
Well, it's not so obvious that they've done it.
Yeah, exactly.
So, you know, it's one of those things. It's easy to downplay the successes afterwards. I think it's probably worth mentioning as a closeout the role of luck in all of this, because no matter how much you think you're good at this sort of stuff, and there's this thing called the survivorship bias, where a lot of the stories we hear about of businesses are told by those that succeeded. It's like history is written by the victors type theory, isn't it? And so with that, if you were to try and learn how to do this well by looking at all those companies that have taken big risks and won big, you know, whether that be Tesla or Amazon or Google and all the things that they've done, then a large part of the success of lots of these companies is down to luck. And you never get to hear about those that just didn't have the luck coincide. So somebody like YouTube apparently had loads of similar businesses competing with it before it really got going. But the broadband capacity just wasn't quite there. And it just happens that YouTube came along
at the right
as
time.
it was building, and they didn't run out of money like the others did before the broadband footprint came good. So it's interesting just to see really how you've got to take the balanced risk in the first place and accept the fact that luck will probably still pay 80% of the role in whether you work or not. But that's where your chap Nate Silver, with his poker playing background, was very comfortable with that. Just understand the risks, make sure that
you've got to be in it to win it, haven't you?
Well, if you haven't got a lottery ticket, you're right. That's it. That's the whole point, isn't it? So if you sit there with sitting on your hands, not taking any risks, you won't lose anything. But someone else in your market might, and then they overtake you, and you've lost everything. Then, so you can't stand still. Okay, good discussion on risk then.
You're going to take some risks.
Take some risks.
I
was thinking about the next podcast that we know.
What's he going to say now? Say something politically incorrect or something. That could be risky.
So time to move on.
What's the upside?
Not sure there's any payback from that. Only downside.
I'm sure there would be payback.
Well, payback,
but from some,
in the positive side,
no.
So I'll cut off Richard's microphone at that point.
So, Pete, flick the switch.
Quick, turn it off. So thanks again for listening to another one of our wacky podcasts from the SME Growth Podcast, brought to you from Wellmeadow. Hopefully some interesting and useful, thought-provoking stuff for business owners and managers, especially your small and medium-sized businesses. If you like what you're hearing and you think that might be useful or others might like it, please pass on the word and see if you can beat the RevOps record-winning YouTube viewer figures that we got recently from that episode. And in the meantime, good luck with your business.